Hi, I'm Mark Stetson with Mashable. I'm gonna make a yeast starter. And by I'm gonna make a yeast starter, I mean my wife is going to help me make a yeast starter. Because she loves to bake, and I can only make hard-boiled eggs. Which isn't baking.
He's exaggerating. He can't make hard-boiled eggs.
Now luckily, I had some help from a yeast scientist who was more excited about yeast than I have ever been about anything.
If anything, I should be thanking you. I like really experience this, really get into it. This is only part one of my dastardly plan to make America fall in love with yeast genetics.
Going into this, I was convinced that in order to make a real yeast starter, you needed to be like a true alchemist of the highest order. Turns out you only need 3 ingredients: water and flour, like less than a handful of a fruit that has a tendency to have yeast on its skin. It's like apples or dates or raisins, which is what I went with.
So in the beginning, the raisins have yeast on their outside and the raisins have tons of sugar, right? So like when you add the raisins to the water, the sugar gets dissolved in the water. The yeast come off the raisins and float free. So the yeast start eating the sugar, the flour starts getting hydrated and releasing more sugar. So the yeast are sort of really, really happy.
That led me to utter a sentence I never thought I would utter.
I picked the yeastiest raisins I could find.
So we took 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water, and less than a handful of raisins and mixed them up. I now know that this is not the best way to mix these ingredients together. So the yeast, especially in the beginning, needs to be kept at a constant 70, 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So Sudeep, the yeast scientist, gave me this tip that the best way to maintain that temperature is to literally keep it under your shirt.
If you stuff it down your shirt, right, it's not exactly body temperature. It's slightly colder than body temperature. It warms it up, definitely doesn't get it too hot, won't kill it, right? You're physically having your starter, birthing your starter.
Once we had the yeast, it was time to name it.
Seymour is starting to bubble.
Day 3 was a big bump for my confidence.
Seymour is still bubbling. I was convinced that I was going to completely botch this from the beginning.
I was convinced.
We were both convinced that I had absolutely no way of succeeding at this task. But Seymour is still alive, and we're all flabbergasted.
I was told that you have to discard most of the starter every day and then just feed the small remainder. But that seems to me like a waste. Why do you do that?
The yeast are in this house full of food. They're also living with different types of waste products and different types of things which they're happy to metabolize, but not really, really doing well on, right? So if you take a tiny bit of the yeast and put it into a new jar with new food, it's just gonna have fresh food, fresh resources, and fewer of those waste products around, and it's gonna go much faster.
So we were planning to do a bake of some sort today with Seymour. Issue is that I didn't grow Seymour enough for us to really be able to bake anything. What we needed was at least half a cup, and we have probably closer to 1/4 of a cup of Seymour. So we have to feed Seymour one more day.
And then something happened that almost upended the entire operation. So that night, I fed Seymour, and then I put him where I usually put him, which is right next to my computer monitor, because it's the most consistently warm place in the house. And I woke up the next morning to find that Seymour had risen to such an extent that he'd burst through the top of the container, totally destroying the top and spilling all over the container. So luckily there was still enough good Seymour yeast that I fed him again, put him in a new container, and monitored his growth throughout the day. So when it was time to bake, Seymour was ready.
1 cup of yeast will give us just about right around 4 or 5 crumpets, depending on size. Figured it's a really easy recipe, so I figured we'd start off with something super duper easy.
Did you pour baking soda back in here?
I didn't pour anything in there.
It's fine, everyone. I found the sugar. It's at the bottom.
Nice. Yes.
And there you have the crumpets.
Oh yeah, it's good. Seymour made crumpets.
We're so proud.
Once we had the crumpets under our belt, I felt like it was time for the big bake by myself for the first time, pretzels.
So how'd the pretzels go, Mark, you say? Well, here they are. Our little baby boy Seymour has blessed us with these very asymmetrical, inconsistent, but delicious looking pretzels. It worked! What do you think? What do you think? What do you think?
Tastes like a pretzel.
Yes, because it is a pretzel. We made pretzels. I feel so. You want more? I feel so accomplished.
Yeast is a technology. We are now making meatless products in yeast. We have been using yeast to produce our medicines, right? Like yeast is going to be an integral part of how we're going to be solving COVID processes, right? Like the way we understand cancer, the way we understand aging, that all comes from yeast.
We had to keep this thing alive. I didn't expect to like develop such a personal bond with yeast.
Feed me, Seymour.
You know, we were feeding Seymour, and then Seymour was feeding us. Like, this has opened up a whole new world of baking, of caring for something, having something to keep alive, and to have this symbiotic relationship kind of gave me a new sense of purpose, of which I felt myself starting to lose a little bit. So I plan to keep this yeast going. Seymour will not die this day. Hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions about yeast, ask a yeast scientist.